guys, hope you're well. Welcome to my channel. So today we're going to look at Docker terminologies and the common terms that you hear in Docker ecosystem, right? So before jumping into it, I just want to uh, let you know that if you are a database administrator, if you're considering a career change and coming into DevOps, and or if you are a fresh graduate just interested in DevOps, database, and AWS topics, or you just like an IT professional who wants to broaden your skill set, please subscribe to this channel. Post topics. I post videos on all these topics, and you will definitely not waste your time watching my videos. So subscribe right now, please. So let's jump right in. So this is a long list, but I don't want to spend too much time giving you like an overview. But basically, these are the terms that we're going to look at, and I'm going to just briefly explain all these topics because each of them, or especially the volumes and networking topics, are really big topics, and you could actually do separate videos on them. But I just want to give you a brief introduction on these topics, and that way you're aware of these terminologies. Yeah, the first thing is Docker engine. So Docker engine is basically what makes it possible to manage containers. So what it comprises of is the Docker daemon, which is the Docker D process that runs behind the scenes when you install and start Docker. This Docker D process runs behind the scenes, and when you're running Docker commands, as in Docker PS or Docker build or Docker run, these CLI, the commands that you run with the Docker CLI, right, uh, gets sent to Docker daemon, and Docker daemon is actually the process that kind of like executes these commands, right? So and of course, like so the Docker daemon process and the Docker client, client tools like Docker and Docker Compose, which we'll look at like shortly. These are the things, and then the code that underlies these processes are basically forming the Docker engine. And if you think about it, it's actually a typical client server model, as in like I'm a database guy, so if you're familiar with Oracle database at all, so you usually like log into like a SQL Plus session and then run your queries. So a SQL Plus session is basically on the client side, and then that is interacting with the database server, which is on the server side. So that's a client server application. So it's that kind of analogy hopefully helps you understand this as well. And of course, like database is a much more complicated software, um, you know but yeah, so let's actually move on. So you also have like Python and Go SDKs, which are provided by Docker, which these SDKs can be imported into your programs, basically your Python Go programs, and then you can actually work with containers, manage your containers through these programs. And I actually didn't know of this until I was doing some research for this video, right? That was actually surprising to me as well. So here's a screenshot of me running, first of all, the Docker. I just wanted to see the Docker D process. Like, sometimes you forget like what's going on behind the scenes, right? So this is ps minus ef grep Docker. So Docker D is actually running behind the scenes, and it's actually doing all the work. And what you're mostly familiar with is Docker CLI tool. Like we are running Docker PS, Docker run hello world. So this is actually a simple command which kind of like shows that it's basically looking for this hello world image locally. So it has it doesn't exist locally, so it has to go to the Docker Hub. And again, we'll talk about Docker Hub quickly in a couple of minutes. But then mainly like it's actually going to Docker Hub and pulling the image, creating a container, running a script in the container which prints this message, and then which is sent to the terminal. All that is being done by the, mainly by your Docker D process, and then of course it's working with the Docker client, Docker CLI, right? And this is the SDKs part that I was talking about. So you have like all these Docker libraries that you can import into your Python Go programs, and then you can do the same thing. Like, here you're creating a Alpine container, uh, and then here again you can actually run a container and detach from it. So anything that you can do with Docker CLI can be done with Python or Go SDKs, actually, that you get from Docker website. Docker registry and repository. So you need some place to store your images, right? So you cannot just have it on your laptop or just on your local machine, right? So you need to store your images somewhere. That way you can pull the image to other machines and other people can use it and so on. So Docker images are basically templates. It's like a blueprint with instructions to create your container, right? So if you think about it, like let's say you want your Docker container to be, the base image should be Ubuntu. On top of it, you want some Python installed, and so on. So you put all those instructions, and you want like some files to be copied into it. You put all the instructions in a Docker file, and using the Docker file, you can build an image, and then that image gets like stored in some place, and that some place is registry, right? So Docker Hub is, as I show in the screenshot, is like the biggest public registry. You can push your images to this registry. As you can see, there's like 5 million plus images right now. And yeah, once it is uploaded to a registry, if it's public, then everyone can access it. And of course, like, companies don't want like to put their confidential proprietary software information, they don't want to open it to the public, right? Most people, if it's not open source, so they definitely need like a private registry. And how do you create a private registry? These are the commands, and of course, like, these are just taken out of Docker documentation. So it's basically the same way you create containers, you run Docker run command to actually create a registry container. And then this is an example of them pulling a Ubuntu base image and then tagging it and then pushing it to the local registry. And so if you have the registry, what is a repository, right? So sometimes actually, if you go to Docker Hub and then look at Python or any software that's available on Docker Hub, right? You will see multiple versions in this, multiple versions with the same name. So all that could be in the same repository. So it's the same software, but it will have different tags, and each will be for different functionality. So repository, you can push an image to a registry, or you can also push a repository to a registry. So I don't want to go more into it, but basically I just wanted to let you know about that. Okay, so Docker volumes, it's a big topic, but mainly if you want to, like, let's say you're running your Docker container, and you're running your application inside your container, and your application is like collecting data from the user, and this data is precious, right? Data is precious. So you don't want to actually lose the data, like, over time, right? Like, let's say this container goes down and comes back up, you still want your application to have the data. For example, let's say that you're running like some kind of e-commerce application, and e-commerce has cards and orders and whatever. So you don't want to lose this data. So this data, any data that needs to be persisted, Docker basically recommends to have the data in Docker volumes, right? And the same thing can be done through bind mounts, but bind mounts are basically sort of like old school way or traditional way of doing things, and you can achieve the same thing using bind mounts, but they don't recommend using bind mounts now. So Docker networking. So when you're working in a company, you'll be working in multiple containers, Not only that, like one container has to talk to another container. For example, in microservices design, you would have an application container and a database container. And database container is, let's say it's a MongoDB database. And of course, these two containers need to talk to each other. And of course, you need to let the web traffic, like outside traffic, come into, or basically be able to talk to your application or access your application in the other application container. So all these things need to happen, right? So you need to take care of networking around that, right? So that is Docker networking. So, and this is actually a huge topic as well. So again, we're not going into detail here, but I just wanted to let you know of the basic terminologies. Docker Compose. Okay, so Docker Compose is another tool that's available to you, right? So if you're a developer, let's say your application is made of multiple containers, again, like an application, a web application container, or a database container, and so on. And you can put all the configurations of your application, the containers, the configuration of the containers forming your application in one single file, one single YAML file, and you will just run this Docker compose up command, and that will create your containers, all your containers, and then start them up at the same time. And that helps you like save some time. Actually, it's a little bit of optimization that you can do. So that's why you need Docker Compose. And finally, Docker Swarm and Kubernetes. So Docker Swarm and Kubernetes are basically two different products that basically do the same thing, which is managing your containers in a cluster. So what do I mean by managing, right? So when you are running your containers, you basically need to take care of high availability, meaning like you want to, let's say, divide your traffic, application traffic or load between a bunch of containers, right? So let's say you have two containers, and then 50% will go to container A, 50% will go to container B, and so on. So you will have many replicas of the same container. So, and then also when you're upgrading your application, you don't want to have downtime, so you would upgrade one container at a time, which is called rolling upgrade. All that can be done in this cluster, right? So Docker Swarm is basically Docker's product, and Kubernetes was developed by Google. So Kubernetes is much more popular than the Docker Swarm. So yep, so those are the two products that you can use for uh, you know basically orchestrating containers in a cluster. That's it. Like those are all the topics, and thanks for your patience and watching through this video, and I'll see you in my next video. Thank you.